Hi, I'm Jessica, and we all know that not every book is for every reader. That can feel especially true with new releases. So today I'm going to be sharing all of the new releases that I have read so far in 2025 and letting you know what kind of reader I feel like each book would be best for. If you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts too. The first new release that I read this year was Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. This is a dark historical horror novel that is set in the 1960s at a home for pregnant girls in the American South. It is considerably less campy than Grady Hendrix's early books. So if you're thinking of Grady Hendrix as more, the Final Girls Society, or if you're thinking of him, like Horror Store, like the IKEA horror book, that kind of thing, this is much more serious. And in a lot of ways, it feels a lot closer to historical fiction for me. It is recommended for people who like their horror to have some emotional weight. This is not campy. It's not even particularly gory. The horror comes from a lot of the situations that the girls themselves are in and less from external forces. I would recommend it if your favorite Grady Hendrix book is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, because to me, that's what this book felt like, just in a different setting. It's the same kind of idea where we're exploring people in a certain time period, and we're using these fantastical elements to kind of bring out a lot of the situations that society had placed them in at that time. It's a much deeper book than I thought I was ever going to get from Grady Hendrix. To be honest, I've been reading his books since he first started writing them, and I absolutely loved it. And I would recommend it for people who like their horror novels to have a little bit more to them. If you liked We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson and a lot of other kind of more classic horror, I think that this would be something you would really enjoy. If you liked The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, which is a horror novel that has a lot of historical depth to it, I think that this would be something that you might really enjoy if you look at the blurb and it seems like something that you might be interested in. I would highly recommend checking it out. I thought it was fantastic. The next new release that I read was The Outcast Mage by Annabelle Campbell. This is a debut novel. It is a coming-of-age fantasy story at the start of a new trilogy. We are following someone who is very much the outcast mage. She is enrolled in a magical school. She has powers that are a little bit frightening to some of the other people around her. And the book follows the politics in the world, the politics in the school, and a lot of bigger forces that I would say we don't really know about since this is just the first book. I would recommend it to people who aren't into it just for the idea of it being a magical school, because the magical school setting was actually a very small part of this book. This is not the thing to go into if you're looking for something that is going to really give you that Harry Potter feel. This is not it. This is something very different. I did think that it had a little bit more of a young adult or a simpler fantasy feel, which I think can actually be nice if you're not in the mood for something extremely complex. I would recommend it for people that enjoyed books like, this is a stretch, but say The Magicians by Lev Grossman, or perhaps A Deadly Education, although again, this is not so much about the magical school. I would say The Magicians is much more something that is a little bit about a school, but also about a lot of other stuff. Next, we have Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. I love T. Kingfisher, and if you've been on my channel before, you already know that because I talk about her books all the time. This is a re-release of a book that she independently published that has now been published traditionally by Tor. This was not my favorite of her books that I have ever read. I think that you can tell a little bit that it is an earlier book because it doesn't have the kind of like snappy pacing that her newer books have. I felt like it was a little bit slow in places, which kept it from reaching a 5-star for me. But having said that, it's still a T. Kingfisher book, which means that we have a cranky older heroine. And I would recommend it for people who like a non-traditional romance, who like a heroine who's not 20 years old with beautiful golden locks and is sassy, but somehow still so cute. This is a older woman. She is a widow. She thinks that she's done with that part of her life. And then lo and behold, she meets a man who is trapped inside a sword. And if that setup sounds good to you, I think you will have a good time with the book. I did have a few pacing issues, as I said, but I think that overall it's still very, very enjoyable. And I would recommend it, especially if you're looking for a lighter romantic fantasy. And I would recommend it if you like a lot of cozy style fantasies. If you enjoyed The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, if you like T. Kingfisher's other works, particularly her other romantasy novels such as Paladin's Grace, I think that this would be something that you would really enjoy. I had a good time. And I did read this year the concluding book to the Emily Wilde series, Emily Wilde and the Compendium of Lost Tales. I absolutely love this book. I feel like this series really stuck the landing. And I don't want to spoil anything about the third book. So I will, in general, try to recommend the Emily Wilde series to you. This is a series of fantasy books that are very heavily based in folklore. They're also, I would say, heavy in a very academia feel because our main character is a professor. Her love interest, also a professor, and they are both professors of dryadology, which is the study of fairies in this kind of alternate early 1900s England and Europe, I would say. They are very funny, and their relationship is very good. I would recommend this for people who are looking for a romantasy that has a relationship that won't make you worried for either one of the characters. They are so sweet together. I absolutely adored it. I loved the whole thing. I also think it's a book to read if you are looking for a story about fairies where the fairies are not sexy and sweet and all the things fairies tend to be in books a lot. These are scary fairies. And that is what I am looking for in a book. It turns out I just loved it. It's one of my favorite series, so you should definitely check that out if that sounds good to you. Next, I read When the Moon Hits Your Eye by John Scalzi. This is his story, which is about the moon turning to cheese, like literally cheese. Like, don't go into this thinking, oh, it's probably not actually cheese. It's going to be very well scientifically explained why they thought it was cheese. No, it's cheese. It's cheese. I think that's pretty clear from the blurb of the book, but it's cheese. So in the story, we are following a series of characters through multiple POVs that very rarely repeat. So we're talking, there probably are 30 POVs within this book. How people are reacting to the moon turning into cheese, what that means for the world, what that means for the US, which is where most of it's based. I thought it was really well done. I thought it was light. There was a little bit of social commentary in it, but it was fairly, I thought, understated, actually. I had a good time. I would recommend this for people who like John Scalzi's books that are on the funnier side. So things like Starter Villain, like Kaiju Preservation Society, like Red Shirts. If you enjoyed those books, I think you would probably enjoy this. I will say that this was my least favorite of those books, which doesn't mean I didn't like it because I love all those books, but this one was a little bit lower to me because it had so many POVs that I did feel a little bit lost in terms of finding an emotional center to the book. But I think that if the idea of it appeals to you, it's just an enjoyable farce. I did read the new Ava Reid book this year, and that is A Fable for the End of the World. A Fable for the End of the World is a dystopian young adult novel. It is about a televised competition to the death, kind of like a death match hunt kind of situation in this climate change affected world where we see corporations kind of taking over, where we see a lot of social and economic inequality. And it's also a sapphic love story. So it's kind of all those things in there together. I didn't necessarily have an amazing time with this book. I do think that it's very much a love letter to the dystopian novels that we saw in the 2010s. So if you are somebody who's very nostalgic for, the Hunger Games, for Divergent, for, all those books, I think that this might be something that would work for you. For me, I was a little bit too old to read those books as a young adult. So I read them as an adult. And I don't think I had enough nostalgia for it. I just kind of felt like maybe I should just reread The Hunger Games. And so this one didn't work super well for me, but I do think that if you are someone who loves a dystopia and really, really just is nostalgic for something new in that genre that feels like a book of that time, then I think you might enjoy this book. The next book I have is one that I have not seen a lot of buzz about, and I really think that it needs to get more, and that is The Keeper of Lonely Spirits by E.M. Anderson. I would say this is a queer contemporary fantasy with a little bit of a horror tinge to it. It is about grief and sadness and choosing to stay. It's very gentle and it has a real emotional core to the characters. And let me explain what it's about. Our main character in this book was cursed many years ago and cannot die, but does have the ability to see spirits and to help them to be able to kind of go to their final resting place, whatever that might be. And this is something he feels very called to do. And he ends up as the caretaker for this graveyard that you can see illustrated on the cover of the book. And although he tries to keep himself separate from the people who work there and the people who live in this small town, he is not able to. Now, what did I love about this book? I love that it featured a non-standard romance. The main character of this book, I mean, he is kind of immortal, but he also appears to be about 70 years old, and his love interest is also in his 70s. So we are getting some older person representation. I am so here for romances and books that are not just between young people because everyone deserves that connection, no matter how old they are. I think that if you are someone who loves magical realism that is much more emotional than it is about the plot, I think this is something you would really enjoy. If you enjoy the found family trope, so much of that in here. And I think that if you enjoy a slower paced book, you're going to really enjoy this. It's probably for people who enjoyed books like T.J. Klune's Under the Whispering Door, which is one of my favorites. That's the book it probably reminded me the most of. And also, I would say The Secret Life of Addie LaRue. Now, it's very different from Addie LaRue, but it hits a lot of the same themes. And I did really like that book. So I think that this could also be something that would work for people who really love that book. And again, it's underrated, and I highly recommend checking it out. The next new release that I read was The Ragpicker King by Cassandra Clare. This is the sequel to Swordcatcher, and it is the second book in the Chronicles of Castellane series by Cassandra Clare. This is Cassandra Clare's adult fantasy debut, and for me, someone who actually really likes her young adult books, it really works for me. And I think whether or not you're going to like it depends a lot on whether you like her writing style, because this does feel very much like her young adult books. It's a little bit more intricate. I think you would like this if you like slow burn romantic arcs, because nothing in this book is in a hurry to get anywhere. I've seen it described as a romantasy, and I would not describe this series as a romantasy at all. Especially the first book, I mean, it's just not. And then the second book, there's some romance. But again, there's nothing about it that is centering the plot on that romance. It is much more about the relationship between these two men, one of whom is a prince and the other is his sword catcher, someone who stands in for him in difficult kind of situations. It's more about their friendship, and then it expands and becomes more about the kingdom and some secrets, and keeping it vague because, of course, I don't want to spoil anything about this book, but I actually do recommend them. It feels a little bit nostalgic. So I think if you have some nostalgia for those books, again, I think you would like this. I can't think of any kind of modern comp titles for this necessarily, but I really enjoyed it. Then I read The River Has Roots by Amal El-Matar. Amal El-Matar wrote one of my favorite books, or was one of the writers of my favorite books, which is This Is How You Lose the Time War. Time War is a literary sci-fi novel that some people find to be pretty incomprehensible, but I loved it because the prose was so ridiculously over the top and purple, and it was romantic. This story is a fairy tale that takes place in a small fairy tale-esque village, and it's mostly about the relationship between two sisters. It's very, very short. It's a novella, and it's also illustrated, so it's even shorter than it might at first appear. I read it in a couple of hours, and I thought it was really enjoyable, although I would like to see a full-length novel from this author at some point soon, because I just love her writing. It's so beautiful. So I would recommend it to people who liked the writing style in Time War. If that's what you liked about Time War, I think you're definitely going to enjoy this. And I also think if you enjoy stories that are much more about introspection and emotion and fairy tales than they are about traditional plot. There's not a ton in here, but it does feel like a fairy tale. So if you like books that have that feeling, I think that you would really enjoy it. And I read a fantasy mystery novella next, which is Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite. This is, I would say, a locked room mystery in space. It takes place on a generation ship, and it stars a main character who I would say is very much a Miss Marple type. She's an older lady. She has her knitting that she enjoys. And one day she wakes up in the wrong body. This kind of thing, it could happen in the situation going on in this series, which this is the first book of. I really enjoyed it. I just thought it was something different and fun, and I do enjoy a fantasy mystery. I would recommend it for people that enjoy fantasy mysteries. So if you liked something like The Tainted Cup, specifically because you liked the classic mystery feel that has, I think this would be something that could be very fun for you to fit in. The next new release I read was A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the sequel to The Tainted Cup, which was a book I gave 5 stars to last year, and I actually think that this book, the sequel, was even better. This series follows a Holmes and Watson-esque set of detectives as they try to solve mysteries within, I would say, an extremely strange fantasy world. I don't want to spoil anything about the world because there are a lot of things that you'll kind of want to know about yourself, but it is one of the stranger and more inventive fantasy worlds that I have seen. The characterization is great. The mystery is stronger, I think, in this book than it was in the first book. And we are really starting to learn about the world, the wider world, and the politics of the world. And it just feels like it's building to something. And I am having a fantastic time with this series. I already loved Robert Jackson Bennett because I really adore the Foundry series. And this has really cemented him as one of my favorites. And I would recommend this to people, first of all, who enjoy mysteries. If you liked the first book, you're definitely going to like this book. I would recommend it to people who enjoy kind of, I would say weird science fiction fantasy books in some ways. It's got a lot of things that reminded me of perhaps a Jeff Vandermeer book, something like that. That's hard to explain, but if you read it, you'll understand what I mean. And this is one of my highest recommended series right now. I'm just having the best time with it. Next, we have Where the Axe is Buried by Ray Nayler. This is a book that is about a dystopian future that is not set in our world, but also is set in our world just with all the names of the places changed. It's very classic dystopian feeling. We are in a world where AI has taken on a lot of the parts of our society that we're not used to it doing. It's also about a probably very Russian-esque authoritarian country where the surveillance state is very, very real. And a lot of characters who are dealing with all of those things in all these different places in this world. I thought that it was a real hard hitter. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I would recommend it if you are someone who enjoys classic dystopias like 1984, Brave New World, any of those stories that are really about what your government can take away from you. What are the things that government can do, even when it has good intentions, that are going to cause bad things to happen to society? It just really made me think about a lot of things. And if that sounds good to you, I don't know if I'm explaining it well because it's so complicated, but it was a big surprise to me. I don't know what I expected, but it was not this. And it really just made it to the top, or close to the top at least. I don't want to predict my end of the year list halfway through, but this was a fantastic book and you should read it. Next book I read was a cozy mystery, and that is How to Seal Your Own Fate by Kristen Perrin. This is the sequel to How to Solve Your Own Murder, which I read earlier this year, actually, because I knew I wanted to read the sequel. And it was honestly not necessarily my favorite read of the year. Would I recommend it if you liked the first book? I think that if you're looking to just spend some more time in the world, if you're looking for basically a book that follows the same formula that the first book followed, I think that you would probably enjoy that. For me, it was a little bit too much of the same. So it's not really a recommendation for me, but I do think there are people who are going to really enjoy it. And I do really actually recommend the first book because I loved How to Solve Your Own Murder, but I can't give its sequel quite the same recommendation. Next one I picked up was The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. This is a very shiny cover. I loved this book. This is one of my top reads of the year so far. I've read a lot of beginnings of series in the past few years, and this is one of the strongest ones that I have read. And it really took me by surprise because I didn't have no expectations, but I wasn't sure. The author is someone who is making her fantasy debut. She has previously written historical mystery novels, and you can tell because there is an aspect of this book that is a fantasy mystery, although I would not say that is all the book is. We are following Nima Cross. She is the high scholar of this world, and she is in charge of certain aspects of a series of trials. So here we are with trials. Do you like trials? I don't even know if I like trials, but turns out I do because I love them in this book. I don't want to spoil anything about what happens because even some of the stuff that's in the blurb for this book is, I think, a little bit of a spoiler, but I would say that if you love non-traditional female fantasy protagonists, this is a fantastic one. She is a scholar. She is not here to be involved in any of this explorer, brave person nonsense. No, no. She likes to do calligraphy, magical calligraphy. That's her thing. But she's going to be thrown into some other stuff, obviously. It also plays around with, I think, structure and language a little bit. We do have one of the narrators who is a we narrator, and it worked for me so much in this book. Yeah, it's fantastic. I don't really know what to compare this to. It does have a scholarly aspect to it. It's also quite funny. I would compare it to the Emily Wilde series in terms of the way that the humor goes and things like that. And then it does have that trial aspect. So I suppose, we could get into some books that have trials in them and compare it to that. But I think that it is wholly original and wholly its own. So if it sounds tropey from what I'm saying, it's not tropey. It's really excellent. And if you like strong female lead characters, I would recommend checking it out. Next, we have The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. This is a dark academia novel that takes place at an English boarding school for magical children. Only in this case, instead of following the students, you're following the faculty. Our main character is the head of the school. She's called Safi. Her real name is Sapphire. And she is trying to hold these kids together and prevent them from summoning demons when they should not be. And there's a lot more to it than that. It's a fantastic book. It's very funny, but it's also super dark. I would recommend it for people who are looking for a dark academia story that is different, that doesn't follow all the tropes and all the same plot points as every other dark academia. This one is different. And at some points, I was very prepared to call it cozy academia because it didn't feel dark enough, but we got there. I would also recommend it if you like a sapphic romance that is handled in an excellent way. This is not a romantasy, but it does have a romance as part of the book that I really enjoyed. It also has a lot to say about class and privilege, particularly within education. And if you've ever worked in education or academia, you will understand so much of what the author, who is a teacher, is talking about with many of her comments. It's just such a great book. Recommended for people who liked the Schoolomance series. I mentioned that earlier, but I do think that's a fair assessment here, except you're following some faculty members and not a bunch of students. But it's kind of its own thing. It's hard for me to compare it to anything because it's very different from anything else I've ever read. All right, down to the last 3 books now, and we have The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is a fantasy novel set in an alternative medieval Europe where we follow a band of unlikely heroes, the most unlikely heroes, as they go on a journey to try to return a princess to her throne. This book is kind of, I would say, very Suicide Squad coded. It is extremely funny in a very, very specific kind of way. And I would recommend reading some of the sample chapters. You can find them on, they're on Libby. You can find them in a lot of online stores that sell it and in a couple of online magazines to see if you think that you will like the humor, because what you see is what you're going to get for a lot of the book. But it's not just funny. It also has characters who you will surprisingly learn to care for very much through the course of the book. I really enjoyed this. It's not something that I would ordinarily, I think, pick up or think that I would enjoy, but I just thought that it was really great. I would recommend it for people who like The Black Tongue Thief. That's my best comp of books that I have read. The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman has a very similar sense of humor. I thought it also ended up in a found family kind of situation. I did like The Devils a little bit more. I would recommend this if you enjoy an anti-hero, if you enjoy characters who aren't just all good, if you like a band of misfits having to band together to solve a problem against their wills in some cases, I think that you would really enjoy it. Then we have The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. I have previously really enjoyed her series that begins with One Dark Window, the Shepherd King duology, and this is her brand new book that follows a woman whose name is only 6, and she is a seer. She is someone who has to dream underwater, kind of drown, to get visions for people that pay money to the abbey where she lives. And obviously, a lot happens, a lot goes on. I thought that this was an example of romantasy done really, really well. In some ways, I do think I've seen people say that the plot line is in some ways kind of similar to her first series, and that's, that's probably true, but I don't care because I had a really good time with this book. And I think you will like this if you enjoy books that have very gothic settings, if you enjoy a slow burn romance, because no one is in a hurry to fall in love or anything like that here. And I think if you enjoyed One Dark Window, but you want something that feels a little bit more complex, a little bit more mature, because I do think that this is. I think that if you like gothic stories, if you liked, for instance, although this is not particularly romantic, but if you liked Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, I think this has a similar kind of feel. I think if you are a fan of classic books like Wuthering Heights, things that take place on the moors, I just think it has similar kind of vibes. There were some places in this book where I thought that the language, the dialogue that the characters speak felt a little bit modern compared to the setting, which I didn't like, but it's really kind of my only real criticism. I had a great time with this book. Now I have one more, last book. It is This Princess Kills Monsters by Herman. This is a little bit of a preview of my new release vlog that I'm working on this month. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, I will tell you that I love this book. So this is a fantasy novel about a princess. She is the middle princess in a family of sorceresses, and she has always kind of felt like she's not as good at sorcery. She doesn't have a place. And she doesn't necessarily get along great with her stepmother. And so her stepmother decides to send her off to be married to a king in a neighboring kingdom where they actually don't seem to have very much magic. So the thing that makes this book so great is that it is extremely self-aware, like over the top self-aware. The princess comes from a land of fairy tales, and there are things like she's afraid of spinning wheels because they're so easy to enchant. She can't sleep on a mattress if there's anything under it because that pee is going to feel like a boulder. And that sounds silly, and it is silly, but the book also has a lot of heart, and it's also got some great queer representation and some amazing characters and a really nice, sweet romance. I think it was a great book, and I think a lot of people are going to really, really enjoy it when it comes out, which it's coming out on the 17th of this month, so it's not quite out yet. This one's still an arc that I just finished. And my comp titles for this are actually going to be T. Kingfisher books. So if you like Nettle and Bone, if you like the book I mentioned earlier in this video, Swordheart, I think that these are all books that have a similar feel. Maybe A Sorceress Comes to Call, which is a retelling of The Goose Girl, which there are several references to within this book. It's very enjoyable. It's really enjoyable. Little under the radar. Definitely would recommend checking that one out. And that is the end of my list. I have read a lot of new releases, as I always do, because I love new releases. And I will do this again at the end of the year with all the rest of the books that I get to this year. Now, I would love to know if you have read any of these books or any other new releases this year, and if you would recommend any of them to me. And if you've made it all the way to the end and you're feeling quiet, go ahead and leave me the magnifying glass emoji. And I hope that you all have a fantastic day. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.